Why are you so angry? I'm sometimes taken by surprise by the level of anger with which some people can occasionally respond to my videos, often ones that I don't regard as particularly controversial or provocative. Now, I'm a minuscule fish in a ginormous ocean, and I don't get many viewers or comments, as some angry viewers sometimes take such delight in pointing out. I don't care. I'm just a guy sitting here in his apartment talking about stuff that interests me. As I've said before, it helps me to clarify my own thoughts on a topic, and I find myself doing research into topics that I've never really even thought about before. Sometimes comments will take me a step further along that path, even some of the vitriolic comments, so that's all fine. It does get me thinking, though, about why people get so riled up, even by something little old me has to say. Why? I struggle to understand it. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, often looking for inspiration for my own next video. Some of these videos I like, to some of them I'm completely indifferent, and some of them I really don't like. But even with the ones I don't like, I don't leave negative comments, let alone angry comments. Sometimes on videos that I do quite like, I will try to leave a constructive comment. I'm trying to think, in fact, whether I've ever left a comment on a video that I didn't really like. And I honestly can't think of one. I'm not sure what the point would be. I certainly never rise to the level of anger that some people express in their comments, either on my videos or anyone else's. All YouTube creators encounter these comments, but why? What's the point? And why are you so angry about what someone else has to say, particularly if you're making a pretense about debating an issue? It's an interesting psychological phenomenon. Clearly, there are some people for whom this is just a game. They're not really angry. They're just trying to provoke a response in you. They seem to think that it's fun for some reason. These are the trolls that we talk about. But others, I have to assume, are genuinely angry. In fact, these people are pretty easy to troll themselves. It's easy to push their buttons if you want to play that game. Mostly I don't, but I'm only human and sometimes it's very, very tempting. But why such genuine anger if that's what it is? It certainly seems to me that the anger expressed, in my own case at least, is quite disproportionate. And for that reason, it has the feel of a kind of straw that broke the camel's back. Now, what that expression means, obviously, is that anger can build within a person for quite some time, incrementally, but it remains contained. But then one thing comes along, and it may be quite a trivial thing, and it's this that finally pushes the person over the edge, much to everyone's surprise around them, and even sometimes to the person themselves. So, even though a person may be ranting and raving about this, they're actually angry about a whole lot of other that's. In fact, I think part of the problem is that the person themselves doesn't really know what's making them so angry. If I were to challenge them, suggesting that they're not really angry at me at all, they're not really angry at what I had to say, well, they'd probably get angry at that too. They have to double down and justify their anger. This kind of diffuse general anger seems pretty widespread in society, and people seem to work very hard to find a target for it. I think pretty obviously this is amplified online. There are fewer social inhibitions operating here online, which perhaps makes it easier to vent. Although I think some of these social inhibitions are breaking down in real life too. I think we see that in such phenomena as road rage and in the emergence in recent years of the Karen. Just as an aside, I think it's another interesting symptom of our society that there's no agreed upon male equivalent for Karen. A woman being angry is still more noteworthy than a man being angry, apparently. But even just as I'm here now making this video, I'm wondering what someone somewhere will manage to be angry about regarding what I have to say here. Why is it that people are so angry? What is this anger a symptom of? What's its cause? I read a recent Huffington Post article entitled, "It's Not Just You, This Is Why Everyone Is So Much Angrier These Days," with the subtitle, "Yup, It's Very Much a Thing." So I'm not the only one to think this. In that article, Sarah Louise Kelly says she's felt far angrier since the pandemic than she ever felt before. She wouldn't have described herself as an angry person prior to the pandemic, but now she would. Obviously, the pandemic upset the world in a staggering way. There was, of course, COVID itself, the effects it had on people. There were the lockdowns, the restrictions, all of that. It turned our world upside down. It placed authority, political and scientific, under a great deal of pressure. It was tough for everyone. And perhaps the anger that many people feel now is one of the symptoms of society's long COVID. Perhaps one of the things that suffered most as a result of the pandemic was our sense of being in control. This was seriously undermined, I think. Suddenly we felt vulnerable, exposed. This also contributed to an increased distrust of authority and expertise. These institutions were supposed to protect us from things like this, and there was a sense that they failed. Not only that, but they actively deceived us. I actually think that science served us fairly well through the crisis, and I think our governments, for the most part, actually did a pretty good job of getting things under control. I know this is probably a minority opinion. Of course, mistakes were made, and of course, there were some very obvious exceptions to this. You know who you are. Before the pandemic, of course, there was 9/11 and the events that followed that, which surely changed the world as much, if not more, than the pandemic. The first quarter of the 21st century sure has thrown a lot of shit our way. But I'm not sure that it was actually more shit than previous generations have experienced. Different, yes, but more? It probably feels like that to us, but I'm not sure. There's a lot I'm not sure about. I'm also not sure, for instance, if people actually are more angry now than they were in the past. How do we go about measuring how angry our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents were? Maybe there were always Karens and, let's call them, Kens. It's just that no one was filming them. According to that same article in the Huffington Post, a Gallup Global Emotions report showed that anger around the world has been rising since 2016, with 23% of respondents now feeling angry, or I would prefer to say reporting feeling angry on any given day. This doesn't really go back far enough for me, though. It might just be a momentary blip. Looking at that Gallup report itself, the overall negative index experience slipped in 2023 for the first time since 2014. This measures a range of negative emotions: physical pain, worry, sadness, stress, and anger. Overall, as I read this report, actually about 22% of people said that they experienced anger the day before the survey. This was actually a fall of 1% from the year before, so maybe the Huffington Post article is actually reporting the results from the year before. Across the world, Guinea had the highest overall negative index at 53 out of 100, while Vietnam had the lowest at just 11. The USA and Australia were somewhere in the middle, with the USA being a little higher than Australia. So the Gallup report that the Huffington Post article cites doesn't actually support the idea that we're getting angrier. Nevertheless, there certainly seems to be a perception that we are, and there may be a couple of reasons for this. First of all, there are now many more outlets for expressing our anger, mainly online. And secondly, our inhibitions against expressing anger are lower than they were. These inhibitions are both psychological and societal. Obviously, Twitter X is the classic example of this. The gloves are off. Anything goes. In other words, it's become more acceptable and more commonplace to express our anger than it was before. And this may be somewhat contagious. Anger begets anger. I'd also suggest that anger is addictive. It triggers the release of endorphins, giving us a high. I think it may also give us some sense of power and control. We feel as though we're doing something when we're angry, and we experience a sense of our own righteousness. Of course, this high is fleeting and the power is illusory. I don't actually get very angry very often. When someone is angry at me, I'm more inclined to feel hurt and misunderstood than angry. My challenge is not to take it personally, not to let it drag me down. The challenge for other people might be to avoid getting angry in return. I don't think much of what is said in anger is of any real value. Anger is not a good place from which to act or appear rational. But then, I guess that's not the point of anger, is it?